Now, Steve Norris is a long-time parliamentarian, parliamentary colleague of mine, a minister in the aforementioned government of John Major, and twice the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London. If you want my honest opinion, he'd have been a better Mayor of London than Boris Johnson, about whom I'm about to ask him. He's good enough to join us now. Steve, I know you're a loyal Conservative, but would you agree with me that events, dear boy, events are beginning to close in on the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson?
I would. I think nowadays Conservatives ask themselves, is he a winner or is he a leader? They can't deny that he won a famous election in 2019, a very large majority, and I think largely unexpected by the public at large. Winning, of course, some of those seats in the north of England that the Conservatives hadn't either ever won or hadn't won for 100 years. So a winner, certainly, a man with a unique charm, although I'm not sure I'm particularly prone to it, but nonetheless, clearly a man of charm. But as far as, well, particularly in recent events, as far as his judgment as a leader is concerned, well, then it's an open secret that many parliamentarians, as well as many members of the party, are very concerned indeed about whether he is actually a suitable leader, particularly taking us out of the worst of the pandemic and into the new world after.
Well, he has charmed the pants off a lot of people, one of whom allegedly is this woman, Arcuri, who's now cooperating with the ethics watchdog and possibly the police. The Labour Party have this evening in The Guardian, in the form of the deputy leader, Angela Rayner, raised that very possibility that there is now prima facie evidence that he committed misconduct in public office as Mayor of London in affording quite considerable taxpayers' largesse to Miss Arcuri, scratching her back while she was scratching his, as it were.
Well, I mean, that may be your opinion, George. Scratching the back, I'll have to think about that. But actually, I don't think the Jennifer Arcuri story is going anywhere. I mean, people factor that into their view of Boris, as they do so many of the things that might cripple almost any other parliamentarian, any other politician on the planet. It's rather like Trump in that respect, you know, this ability to be able to just ride over all sorts of issues, of which Miss Arcuri is merely one, that would flatten any normal politician and which seem to rebound from him literally like water off a duck's back. I think the more serious issue is, for example, his tendency to, to act without thinking, to act without really studying an issue and understanding it, which does cause many in his own party, and I readily admit that I'm one of them, to be concerned about his quality as leader, not denying his popularity as a winner, but the two are, of course, in the end, inextricably linked. You only have to look at the Conservative Home table, which is a Conservative Home, first of all, as many of your viewers will know, is a table compiled from very loyal Conservatives, pretty much right of centre, I would say, but be that as it may, who rank every minister from the Prime Minister downwards. And actually, Boris generally is in the bottom third of that ranking, if not lower. And yet he wins elections and he has a majority of 80 in Parliament. That's the real conundrum. Angela Rayner, in my view, frankly, is probably a godsend for the Conservatives on balance, because every time she speaks, I think a few more people decide that maybe if that's the opposition, if you like, if she's potentially the next deputy leader of the government, the safest thing is probably to just vote Conservative.
Now, of course, events are not just on the Kaddish bounder issues, but boundary issues, frontier issues. We have a situation where a Conservative government with a majority of 80 seats, in other words, can do anything that it likes, is presiding over the arrival of thousands of people a week on the beaches of the south coast of England and appear to be completely unable or unwilling to do anything to staunch the flow.
I mean, I think this goes back, George, as you and I know, not just for the 12 years of this government, but way beyond it. We are apparently unable to do what the vast majority of people want us to do, which is to distinguish between those who have a genuine reason to wish to claim asylum in the UK, or for some other reason, for example, family in the country should be allowed to enter, and those who simply should not be allowed to enter, particularly those, incidentally, who jump the legitimate queue, albeit considerable risk to themselves, by coming across without any notice or authority, if you like, in small boats. Now, you know, that's a dangerous practice in itself, but it's evidence of the one thing that the traffickers probably say to these migrants, which is true, because they won't tell them a lot that's true, that's for sure. But the one thing that is they say, don't worry, when you get there, chances of you actually being sent back either here or anywhere else are very, very small indeed. And of course, we had the recent case of that appalling business of the Liverpool bomber, who turns out to have arrived on a false prospectus, to have remained here on a false prospectus, to have taken years to organize his ability to remain in the United Kingdom, who was never, ever sent away from the UK, and who, you know, but for, thank God, the fact that his bomb primer exploded, might well have caused enormous, incalculable mayhem. Now, if that sort of thing can happen, you have to ask yourself in how many other circumstances it's happening. But George, you know one thing, which is this is not easy. Because, for example, it must irritate an enormous number of people when a flight that has on it 15, say, people whom the government wishes to expel, many of whom, incidentally, have been released from prison having served sentences for very serious crimes indeed, or for similar reasons, are then frustrated by late action by ambulance-chasing lawyers who simply argue that these people must not be expelled from the country. Now, you know, the frustration that's there is based on the fact that we have an incredibly fair approach to these issues, but perhaps just a little bit too fair. And it's about time that we actually said, you know, look, let's be clear what the objective is here. It's to separate the genuine from the non-genuine. And those who don't have a genuine reason to be here should be sent back to wherever they came.
Well, these are genuine and long-standing liberal arguments. The question is, can a Conservative government with a big majority convincingly make them? Perhaps we'll see in the upcoming by-elections some loss of Conservative support on this issue and on the other issues, the sleaze issues and so on. Perhaps the hand of the Conservative MPs might be beginning to be pushed.
Well, look, the first thing is that Sir Keir Starmer apparently wouldn't just, want to meet the boats halfway across the channel. He'd want to go all the way to France to bring them over personally. I mean, Labour's issue or stance on this is laughable and is going to win them no friends. There may be those who, frustrated by a lack of progress, will wish to move to the far right, to the ludicrous party headed by Richard Tice. But the reality is that this is a problem which far outdates the 80-strong majority that Boris Johnson has. Yes, of course, I think there is now, George, and the very fact that you're saying this, that there's a very strong evidence of this is an absolutely nationwide, politics-wide issue that we know has to be tackled. This is bigger than any individual party. It's not, in my view, caused by the Conservative Party. It's not this party, nor indeed the last Labour government's fault that they failed to deal with it convincingly. Now I think people are seeing, as the numbers rise, a need to maybe go far beyond where we've been before. This will apply across the board. And incidentally, George, I have not the slightest doubt that if the Conservatives do introduce the kind of legislation that would deal with this problem, that Labour will scream blue murder about human rights and so on.
Sure, but the Tories have got the Gatling gun of an 80-seat majority. Many Conservatives will be asking themselves, if they've got that Gatling gun, why aren't they using it?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I don't deny that. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And we'll see whether or not the government can come up with something more convincing, because so far, of course, they'd have to admit that they haven't. But I just make the point that this is not something which you can exclusively lay at the door of the Conservative government. It was equally a problem that Labour failed to address when it was in office. The urgency now, I suspect, is because the people smugglers, the criminals who are persuading these people to get into these boats to sail across the channel while the weather allows it, are very much front and center in the news, and people are, I think, rightly outraged. They do want the government to do something. What will be interesting is if the government does come up with as I say, with a set of proposals which will cut across some of our long-held principles of justice, freedom, and so on, just how the opposition, for example, tries to attack it, because attack it, I'm quite sure they will.
Steve Norris, as always, fascinating to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.